In Houston, Texas, life had once been bright and full of laughter for 10-year-old Lucas. He loved racing down the neighborhood streets with his friends, running across grassy fields and climbing trees until the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. His energy was endless, his laughter contagious, and to his mother, Sarah, he was the reason she found strength to endure every struggle life threw at her. But all of that changed one tragic evening. A terrible car accident left Lucas's small body broken, his legs permanently paralyzed. Overnight, the boy who once couldn't sit still was confined to a wheelchair, his future stolen in an instant. The doctors did everything they could, but the news was grim. Sarah sat in the cold hospital room, clutching her son's tiny hand, her heart pounding with fear as the doctor's words echoed, "He will never walk again." Her breath caught in her chest. She wanted to scream, to argue, to beg for another answer. But the truth weighed heavily on her. Lucas, just a child, stared at the ceiling in silence, unable to process the life that lay ahead. In his young mind, the world had been turned upside down, and hope slipped away before he even understood what hope really meant. Sarah's life had already been difficult before the accident. She worked as a waitress at a small diner on the outskirts of Houston, juggling long hours and meager wages just to put food on the table. She lived paycheck to paycheck, always one bill away from losing everything. But now, with mounting medical expenses and the constant care Lucas needed, the struggle became unbearable. Nights were long and heavy, filled with tears she hid from her son, and mornings began before dawn with the same weight pressing down on her shoulders. She told herself to stay strong, but deep down her spirit was breaking. Lucas, too, changed in ways that frightened Sarah. The once energetic, playful boy became quiet and withdrawn. He no longer wanted to see his friends, embarrassed by the chair that carried him instead of his own two legs. His laughter disappeared, replaced by silence and sadness. At just 10 years old, he felt robbed of the freedom every child deserves. His old wheelchair, already worn and creaking, only deepened his frustration, each squeak and wobble reminding him of what he had lost. To Sarah, watching her son lose his light was more painful than anything she had ever endured. One rainy evening, as the streets glistened with water and the air smelled of wet pavement, Sarah pushed Lucas's wheelchair home from the grocery store. The chair's wheels struggled on the uneven sidewalk, catching on cracks and jerking to the side. With every push, Sarah's tired arms ached, but she kept going, determined to bring her son safely home. Lucas sat quietly, staring at the ground, lost in his thoughts. The drizzle tapped gently against his thin jacket, but he didn't seem to notice. After a long silence, his small voice broke through the sound of rain. "Mom," he whispered, his words trembling, "I'll never walk again, will I?" Sarah froze, her heart twisting inside her chest. She wanted to say something, anything, to comfort him, but her throat closed. The truth was too heavy. Her eyes filled with tears as she knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. "Don't say that, baby," she whispered, though her voice cracked under the weight of her own fear. Lucas's eyes watered as he buried his face against her, his small shoulders shaking. For a moment the world felt unbearably cruel, and Sarah wished desperately that she could trade places with him, that she could take his pain as her own. But life didn't work that way. As they continued down the street, Sarah unaware of how soaked her own clothes had become in the rain, they passed a small garage where the faint sound of tools clinking echoed through the night. The garage door was half open, light spilling onto the wet pavement. Inside, Ethan, a 29-year-old mechanic, was working late on an old pickup truck. Grease covered his hands and his face was lined with exhaustion. But there was a quiet determination in the way he moved. He had spent most of his life repairing machines for people who could barely afford them, often charging less than he should, because he knew too well what it meant to struggle. Ethan glanced up when he heard the squeak of Lucas's broken wheelchair. His eyes softened as he watched Sarah, struggling against the rain, her arms straining as she pushed the chair forward, her son sitting silently with a look of defeat far too heavy for a child his age. Something inside Ethan stirred, an ache he couldn't ignore. He set his wrench down and stepped closer to the door, wiping his hands on a rag. For a moment, he simply observed, trying to understand their story without intruding, but then he heard Lucas's faint words carried by the rain, "I'll never walk again." Those words pierced Ethan like a blade. He didn't know this boy or his mother, but he understood what it felt like to be hopeless. He had grown up in a poor family himself, often going without, and he knew the pain of being told life would always be unfair. Watching the scene unfold, he couldn't just stand there. He stepped outside, the cool rain splashing against his face, and called gently, "Hey, do you need some help with that chair?" Sarah turned, startled, her first instinct defensive. She was tired of pity, tired of strangers' looks, tired of feeling like a charity. But when her eyes met Ethan's, she saw no judgment, only genuine concern. She hesitated, unsure if she should accept, but Lucas looked up, his eyes wide and curious. The boy hadn't shown interest in anyone in weeks, but something about this mechanic caught his attention. That small spark was enough. Sarah gave a small nod, her voice soft. "It's just old, hard to manage." Ethan crouched down to examine the chair. The wheels were bent, the frame rusted, and the seat torn in places. It was barely holding together. He glanced at Lucas, who avoided his gaze, embarrassed. Then Ethan looked at Sarah and said, "This chair won't last much longer, but I can fix it actually. I can build something better, something he deserves." His words were steady, confident, yet filled with kindness. Sarah blinked in disbelief. No one had ever offered them anything, without asking for something in return. "You'd do that for us?" she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly, shrugging as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "It's just what I do. I fix broken things, and I think your boy deserves a chance." For a moment, Sarah couldn't find the words. Lucas stared at Ethan, a flicker of hope crossing his face for the first time since the accident. In the pouring rain, with grease still staining his hands, Ethan had unknowingly planted the seed of a miracle that would change all of their lives forever. Ethan was no doctor, no scientist, and certainly no inventor. He was just a mechanic, a man who spent his days fixing broken engines, tightening bolts, and scrubbing grease from his hands. But when he saw the hopelessness in Lucas's eyes, something stirred deep inside him. He couldn't bear to think of a child, believing he would never stand again, never laugh like he once did, never live without the shadow of despair. Standing there in the rain, he made a promise not just to Lucas and Sarah, but to himself. He would try. No matter how impossible it seemed, he would build something to help this boy. Sarah, of course, was skeptical. She had heard plenty of empty promises before. People who said they cared, but vanished when things became difficult. Life had taught her to be cautious, to protect her heart from disappointment. But there was something different about Ethan. His voice didn't tremble when he spoke, and his eyes held no pity, only quiet determination. Against her instinct to dismiss it, she allowed herself to hope, just a little. Maybe this man really meant what he said. Maybe he could give her son something she could not. The next evening, Ethan pushed aside the car he had been working on and cleared a small corner of his garage. He gathered every spare part he had lying around. Rusted bike frames, old motors, bits of tubing, wheels too worn for cars, but still usable for something else. To anyone else it looked like a pile of junk, but to Ethan it was possibility. He sketched rough designs on scrap paper, erasing and redrawing, again and again. He didn't need perfection, he needed something practical, something strong enough to hold a boy's fragile body, yet gentle enough to guide him towards standing again. At first, Ethan doubted himself. He wasn't an engineer, he had never designed a medical device before, but whenever doubt crept in, he thought of Lucas's face, the boy's voice whispering that he would never walk. again, and it drove him forward, hour after hour, long after the town had gone to sleep. Ethan kept working. The sound of his tools echoed into the night, sparks flying from the welding torch as he pieced the scraps together. His hands blistered. His body ached, but he didn't stop. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was a mission. Lucas visited often, rolling into the garage in his old wheelchair, the wheels squeaking with every turn. At first, he was shy, unsure of what to say. But as the days passed, curiosity began to replace the sadness in his eyes. He watched intently as Ethan hammered, tightened bolts and connected wires. "What's that part for?" Lucas asked one evening, pointing to a small motor Ethan had salvaged. Ethan smiled and explained, "That's going to give you power, kid. It's going to help you move." The boy's lips curled into the faintest smile, the first one Sarah had seen in weeks. Sarah often stood quietly in the corner of the garage, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite explain. She watched her son's eyes light up, watched Ethan pour himself into the work without asking for anything in return. For years, she had carried the weight of survival on her. Own always the one giving, never the one receiving. But here was this man, a stranger, offering his time, his skill, and his kindness simply because he cared. Tears would sting her eyes when she thought about it, though she always turned away so no one would see. As the days stretched into nights, Ethan's creations slowly took shape. At first, it was nothing more than a metal frame with straps, but with every adjustment, it became more than just a frame. It became a symbol of possibility. He added handles for Lucas to grip, motors to assist his movement, and padded supports to keep him steady. It wasn't sleek or polished like something built in a lab, but it was sturdy, dependable, and filled with the heart of a man who refused to give up. With each bolt tightened, with each wire secured, the dream grew closer to reality. Lucas grew more excited each day. He peppered Ethan with questions, sometimes sitting for hours just to watch. "Will I really be able to stand in it?" he asked one night, his voice trembling between hope and fear. Ethan looked at him firmly and said, "I can't promise it'll be perfect, but I promise you this, it'll give you a chance." Lucas nodded, holding on to those words, as if they were a lifeline. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where he wasn't confined to a chair. The neighbors began to notice too. They would pass by the garage on their way home, curious about the strange contraption being built inside. At first, they whispered among themselves, unsure what to make of it, but when they saw Lucas watching eagerly, his eyes alive with anticipation, their whispers turned into admiration. People who had once overlooked Ethan now saw the quiet strength in him, the way he was giving everything he had for a boy who wasn't even his own. A few even stopped to offer tools, spare metal, or just words of encouragement. The project had begun to ripple through the community. For Sarah, the transformation was almost too much to believe. She had spent so many years surrounded by struggle, abandoned by people she thought she could rely on. Yet now, in this unlikely place, with grease and sparks flying, she saw her son rediscovering hope. She saw him smiling again, laughing even, as Ethan teased him or explained how the machine would work. She would often catch herself smiling too, despite her exhaustion. Deep down, she knew that even if the device didn't work, Ethan had already given Lucas something priceless, the belief that he wasn't broken beyond repair. Ethan's body paid the price for the long nights. His hands were covered in cuts, his back ached from bending over the workbench, and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. Yet he refused to stop. Every time fatigue whispered that he should rest, he remembered Lucas's voice, the way the boy had whispered that he would never walk again. That thought alone fueled him more than sleep ever could. In those long, quiet hours, Ethan realized he wasn't just building a machine, he was building a bridge between despair and possibility, between brokenness and healing. One night, after several days of tireless work, Ethan finally tightened the last bolt and stepped back. The device stood there, imperfect but strong, a testament to what human hands and a determined heart could create. He wiped the sweat from his brow, staring at it with a mix of pride and nervousness. He knew it wasn't flawless, and he worried about whether it would truly work. But when he imagined Lucas's face, he knew it was worth every moment. The boy deserved a chance to believe again, and this machine might just give him that. Lucas came the next day, his wheelchair rattling as he rolled into the garage. His eyes widened when he saw the nearly finished device, and his mouth fell open. "It's real," he whispered, almost in disbelief. Ethan chuckled softly. "It's real, kid. And soon you'll try it out." Sarah placed her hand over her mouth, tears threatening to fall. She had never thought she would see this day. Though she worried about what would happen if it didn't work, she clung tightly to the hope that maybe, just maybe, her little boy could stand again. For the first time in months, the air was filled not with sorrow, but with possibility. Ethan, Sarah, and Lucas stood together in that small garage, surrounded by scraps and grease, yet it felt like the most sacred place in the world. They weren't family by blood, but in that moment, they were bound together by hope, by faith, and by the belief that miracles can sometimes be built with nothing more than determination and love. Weeks later, Ethan finally called Sarah and Lucas to his garage. The device stood ready, gleaming under the flickering overhead light. It wasn't perfect. It still bore the marks of welded seams, mismatched screws, and patched wires. But to Ethan, it was beautiful. It represented every sleepless night, every blister on his hands, every ounce of hope he had poured into it. To Sarah and Lucas, it looked like something out of a dream. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she whispered, "You really did it." Ethan only nodded, his eyes fixed on Lucas, knowing this was the boy's moment. Lucas's small hands trembled as he wheeled closer to the machine. He stared at it in awe, hardly daring to believe that this creation was meant for him. For weeks he had dreamed about this day, and now that it had come, his heart raced faster than ever. Ethan crouched beside him, speaking gently. "We'll go slow, kid. No rush, no pressure. Just take your time." Lucas nodded, though his lips quivered with nervousness. Sarah bent down, brushing her son's hair back, whispering, "You can do this, sweetheart. I believe in you." The garage fell into an almost sacred silence. Ethan carefully guided Lucas into the machine, adjusting the straps to fit his small frame. The metal creaked softly as it bore the weight of the boy's body, but it held firm, just as Ethan had designed it. Lucas gripped the handles tightly, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath with him. Sarah clasped her hands together, silently praying, her eyes glistening with tears that she dared not let fall just yet. "Take it slow," Ethan whispered again, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Lucas closed his eyes, gathering every ounce of courage. Then with a shaky exhale he pushed forward. The device hummed softly, supporting his weight. His body shifted, his legs trembling under the unfamiliar strain. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then miraculously his right foot moved forward. A single step. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth, her knees threatening to give way. Ethan's chest tightened, but he held his composure, encouraging gently, "That's it, Lucas. One more." Another step followed, slow but steady. Then another. Each movement was small, shaky, and uncertain, but each one was a victory. Lucas's face lit up with astonishment as he looked down at his legs. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm walking." Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. She collapsed into sobs, her hands shaking as she cried out, "He's walking! My baby's walking!" Her voice cracked with disbelief and joy, echoing through the garage and spilling out into the street where neighbors had begun to gather. The sound of Sarah's cries drew more people. Curious neighbors pressed closer, peering through the open door of the garage. They had watched Ethan work tirelessly for weeks, but none of them had truly believed the outcome. Now, as they saw Lucas taking steps, their jaws dropped, eyes wide with awe. A few covered their mouths while others wiped at their eyes. Slowly, a ripple of clapping began, hesitant at first, then louder, until the garage was filled with the sound of applause. It was as if the entire neighborhood was cheering Lucas on with each trembling step. Lucas's fear melted into exhilaration. Tears of joy streamed down his cheeks as he laughed, a sound Sarah hadn't heard since before the accident. "I can walk again," he shouted, his voice echoing with pride and disbelief. He moved forward slowly, each step smoother than the last, his confidence growing with every movement. For the first time in months he felt free, not trapped in a chair, not defined by his accident, but alive, capable and strong. The boy, who once believed his life was over, was now living a miracle. Ethan stepped back, watching quietly from the corner. He didn't join in the applause, didn't bask in the admiration of the crowd. Instead, he simply smiled, his heart full to the brim. He wasn't thinking about himself, only about the boy standing before him and the mother whose tears were now tears of joy. For Ethan, this was enough. He had given everything he could, and in return, he had witnessed something far greater than any paycheck or recognition could ever bring. He had watched hope come alive again. Sarah turned toward Ethan, her face wet with tears, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You gave my son back something I thought he'd lost forever." Ethan shook his head softly, brushing off the gratitude with humility. "I just fixed what was broken," he replied quietly. Lucas did the rest. But everyone in that room knew the truth. What Ethan had given wasn't just a machine, it was a second chance. A piece of childhood returned, and a future rewritten. The story didn't stay in the garage for long. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, then across Houston. People spoke of the mechanic who had built a miracle out of scraps, who had turned despair into hope. Strangers came by the garage just to see the device, some bringing food for Ethan, others offering parts and tools. Local reporters even showed up, wanting to capture the story of the boy who walked again thanks to a mechanic, with nothing but determination and heart. The community that had once overlooked Ethan now held him as a quiet hero, but Ethan never let the attention change him. He continued working in his small garage, fixing cars during the day, tinkering with new ideas at night. What mattered to him was not fame or recognition. It was the smile on Lucas's face, the way Sarah's eyes no longer carried the same weight of despair. Every time Lucas visited to show him how much better he was getting, Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He knew the boy's journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and days of struggle, but he also knew that Lucas now had something powerful, hope. The community, too, was transformed. Neighbors who had once been strangers began to look out for each other more. Inspired by Ethan's act of kindness, they organized fundraisers to help families in need, donated supplies, and offered support to those who were struggling. Ethan's small act of compassion had ignited a chain reaction, proving that one person's kindness could ripple outward and touch countless lives. And in the center of it all was Lucas, a living reminder that miracles are possible when love and determination come together. One quiet evening, after the crowds had gone and the garage was still again, Sarah approached Ethan with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just help Lucas," she said softly. "You helped me too. For so long I felt like I was carrying this weight alone. But you showed me we're not alone in this world. There are people who care." Ethan looked down, humbled, and replied, "Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe." Sarah nodded, holding back her tears, knowing that Ethan would forever hold a place in their hearts. And so, what began as a chance encounter on a rainy evening became a story of hope that touched an entire city. Lucas, once broken and hopeless, now stood tall with the help of a machine built by hands that refused to give up. Sarah, once weary and burdened, now walked lighter, knowing kindness still existed in the world. And Ethan, the mechanic who had nothing but scraps and determination, became a symbol of the extraordinary things ordinary people can do. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that true heroes don't always wear capes. They sometimes wear grease-stained shirts and carry hearts of gold.